Captain Jack embarks on his most perilous journey yet, seeking the phantom compass, a relic that points to cursed treasure guarded by a ghostly armada. As betrayals unfold and spectral warriors rise, Jack faces an old rival who returns with dark, newfound power. Will he survive the supernatural forces awakened by the compass? Or has he unleashed a curse that even the Black Pearl can't outrun? What fate awaits the daring crew as they navigate treachery and ghostly foes? The air crackled with anticipation in the lawless port of Tortuga. Night clung to the rickety taverns and shadowed alleys, where whispers of gold and death mixed with the salty sea breeze. At the center of it all, a familiar swagger drew every gaze. Captain Jack, with his deep auburn and black-streaked hair dancing in the lantern light, and a sly grin that could charm the devil himself, strode through the crowd. His eyes, bright hazel and sharp as a hawk's, scanned the faces of rogues, merchants, and cutthroats who dared cross his path. The Black Pearl awaited him, anchored like a predator ready to pounce. Her black sails swayed against the moon's glow, a ship of legend whose past was as murky as the waters she cut through. But tonight, there was no room for the usual games. A new tale, whispered in the dark corners of every tavern, beckoned Jack toward something more than mere fortune. The phantom compass, a relic believed to point its needle to unimaginable wealth and cursed treasure, lay hidden on the Isle of Sable Vortex. None who ventured there had returned whole, or at all. In the dimly lit hovel known as the Broken Oar, Jack found his lead, a hunched crone whose eyes were milky with age but gleamed with unsettling knowledge. Her voice rasped like wind through dry leaves as she spoke. "Find the shadow where the pearl dares not tread, Captain. The compass will bind the spirit you dread." A murmur ran through the room as the cryptic riddle settled like ice in their veins. The mention of spirits and curses wasn't mere tavern talk tonight. It was a warning, one that pried at the memories buried deep within the seasoned captain's mind. A scar from a night best left forgotten. "Right then, gather the crew!" Jack barked, his voice slicing through the whispers. The room fell silent before erupting into motion. With the command echoing in their ears, his crew members, a mix of veteran buccaneers and ambitious young scallywags, rushed to prepare. Among them stood Rafe, lean and scarred with a coiled serpent tattoo peeking from under his rolled sleeve, a man with a past as dark as the sea at midnight. "Captain," Rafe drawled, eyes narrowed with a gleam of ambition, "this voyage could turn the tides of fate itself, or pull us all under," came the sharp retort of Marisol, the fierce, dagger-wielding woman whose loyalty to Jack was forged through debts and storms shared. Her gaze flickered between Jack and Rafe, ever wary of betrayal lurking in the shadows. Jack's grin returned, wider this time, teeth flashing. Fortune never favored the cautious. The crew made haste. They hoisted the sails and set course under a sky cloaked in ink and stars. The Black Pearl glided out of Tortuga's harbor, a phantom itself, slicing through the waves with a grace that belied her storied past. But the sea held more than the weight of their ambition. As dawn clawed its way over the horizon, the waters darkened. The Isle of Sable Vortex loomed ahead, a jagged crown of rock shrouded in tendrils of fog that seemed almost alive. The ship creaked as if shuddering at the sight. Whispers of curses and spirits tightened like a noose around every man's neck, stoking the fire of fear. Suddenly, a deep moan echoed through the fog, and a silhouette emerged. A ship, its tattered sails translucent and rippling with an eerie light. The crew froze. It was the spectral fleet, protectors of the phantom compass, bound by vengeance and led by a captain long whispered about in half-sane stories. Jack's voice snapped them out of their stupor. "Raise arms! Prepare to greet our ghostly hosts!" With that, the Black Pearl roared to life, cannons primed and swords drawn. The sea boiled between them and a storm of spectral fire erupted from the mist. The battle for the compass had begun, but in this fight the cost would be steep, and betrayal was the only certainty. The first volley from the spectral ship shattered the silence with a deep, bone-rattling boom. Greenish fire, as if spewed from the maw of some infernal beast, streaked toward the Black Pearl. It arced high, painting the morning sky with ghastly hues before crashing into the waves, sending plumes of steam into the air. The unnatural heat forced the crew to shield their faces, eyes wide with terror. "Man the cannons! Fire!" Jack's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a cutlass. The crew, with trembling hands and pounding hearts, scrambled into action. The Black Pearl's cannons bellowed in response, thundering iron toward the phantom ship. The projectiles hurtled into the ghostly galleon but passed through its hull, dissipating as though striking smoke. A chorus of fearful gasps rippled across the deck. Jack's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he quickly reassessed. The enemy was no ordinary fleet. It was a legion cursed to haunt the seas, impervious to mortal weapons. Rafe's eyes glistened with something between awe and dread as he stepped forward. The tales were true then. We face the fleet of the Forsaken. Aye, and true or not, they're not here for a friendly chat, Marisol growled. She spun around, slamming her dagger into the rail, steadying herself as the deck tilted with the sudden surge of an unseen wave. The air turned cold. Wisps of fog coiled around their legs, carrying whispers that chilled their blood and sowed fear into their minds. The phantom captain, clad in ragged garments that shimmered with an ethereal glow, stood at the prow of his ship. His eyes burned with an unnatural light, locked onto Jack as though recognizing an old rival. "Captain Jack," the figure's voice rang out, deep and echoing like a tolling bell. "You seek what should remain forgotten." The crew flinched, men grasping at charms and mumbling prayers to gods who had never answered. Jack, however, tilted his head, a wry smile playing on his lips. "A bit late to debate semantics, don't you think?" he shouted back, defiance crackling in his tone. He turned to his crew, eyes blazing. "Bring us closer. If they want to parley, they'll have to do it face to face." The command sent the crew scrambling, some with fists clenched in resolve, others pale as ghosts themselves. The Black Pearl surged forward, slicing through the mist. As they drew closer, the ethereal moans grew louder, a haunting symphony that threatened to shatter the nerves of even the most battle-hardened sailors. Marisol moved to Jack's side, her eyes locking onto the ghostly captain. "You know him, don't you?" A shadow flickered over Jack's features, a memory quick and sharp like the flash of a blade. "Knew him," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "He once sailed with the living." Before Marisol could press him, a shudder rocked the Pearl. The ghostly galleon rammed them, its translucent hull merging for a heartbeat with theirs. The deck groaned underfoot as the temperature plummeted. Ghostly figures, pale and wreathed in tattered uniforms, seeped up through the wood like smoke, eyes glowing with baleful fire. Rafe lunged, slicing at one of the apparitions, but his blade whistled through empty air. The figure retaliated, its spectral fingers clutching at his arm, and a frostbite-like chill blossomed under his skin. Rafe gritted his teeth, muscles locking in pain. "Steel won't work. Use fire," Jack shouted, pulling out a torch from the mast. He swept it through the apparition, which howled before dissipating into nothingness. Inspired, the crew snatched up torches, brandishing flames like sacred talismans. But the ghostly captain, untouched by the turmoil, took a step forward on his phantom ship. His eyes bored into Jack's as if searching for something hidden, something long buried. "You cannot win this, Jack. Return the Pearl to the shadow and walk away with your life." Jack's smirk faltered only slightly. "I would, if it weren't my life at stake, mate." Suddenly, a chorus of wails erupted from the sea itself, and the fog thickened into a wall that trapped them, cutting off the sky and turning day into a spectral twilight. From behind the enemy captain, a chest shimmered into view, bound in chains that pulsed with a heartbeat glow. The phantom compass lay within, tempting yet guarded by powers beyond death. Marisol's eyes darted to the chest, then back to Jack. "Is this worth our souls, Jack?" His smile returned, laced with grim resolve. "If we don't win, it won't matter." The battle continued, fire dancing across the deck as ghostly figures screamed and dissipated under the flames. The Black Pearl fought with the fury of a cornered beast, the crew holding on to hope as their captain faced an enemy no man should face. But Jack knew deep down that hope alone would not be enough. He needed to claim the compass, and he needed to outwit the one ghost who knew him better than any man alive. The roar of cannon fire and the crackle of torches engulfed the deck in chaos. The ghostly wails of the spectral fleet mingled with the shouts of men fighting to stay alive. Jack scanned the deck, noting every flicker of flame, every terrified face. The Black Pearl swayed under the weight of the supernatural battle, its black sails straining against the rising wind. Rafe, muscles tense and eyes blazing, slammed a torch down on another spectral assailant. The ghost shrieked as it dissolved into the thin air, leaving only a chill where it had stood. "We can't keep this up, Captain," he shouted, the strain in his voice betraying fear that he usually kept masked behind bravado. "Keep the fire steady," Jack roared, his voice cutting through the cacophony. He moved like a shadow, agile and unyielding, his scarred cheek glistening with sweat. The captain's eyes darted to the chest shimmering behind the ghostly captain, still guarded by chains that seemed alive, pulsing with a light as cold as the deep sea. The ghostly captain's gaze locked onto Jack, as if seeing straight into the soul he barely held onto. "You seek to wield what you do not understand," the phantom said, stepping forward, his voice low and venomous. Jack's grin, ever defiant, widened. "What's the fun if I did?" Marisol, gripping a torch with a white-knuckled hold, sidled up beside Jack. "There's a storm gathering behind us. We need to end this now or we'll be swept under." Jack's eyes flicked toward the darkening horizon. The sea seemed to churn as if angered by their defiance. He glanced at Rafe, who stood ready, but whose shifting gaze hinted at more than fear. It was calculation. The captain knew that in the midst of fire and specters, a dagger could find his back just as easily as it could slice a rope. "Marisol, on my signal, cut the rope to the mainsail," Jack said, keeping his voice low. Her eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded, trusting Jack's unpredictable strategies more than any plan set in stone. The ghostly captain stepped off the spectral deck and onto the Pearl, the wood beneath his boots hissing as frost spread like a living thing. The air crackled with tension, every man on deck feeling the ancient malice radiating from this otherworldly foe. The ghost's sword, translucent and shimmering with an unnatural green light, rose with a slow, deliberate motion. "Your end is here, Captain Jack," the specter said, its voice layered with the echoes of 100 lost sailors. Jack feigned a stagger, drawing the ghost's attention. "Is it now?" he replied, voice deceptively light. His hand moved with practiced speed, tossing a lit flask of oil toward the chest that held the phantom compass. The glass shattered on impact, splattering the chains with a thin coating of fire. The ghost captain's eyes flared in sudden, violent rage. "No! Now, Marisol!" Jack shouted. She slashed the rope holding the mainsail taut, and with a deafening crack, the Black Pearl lurched as the sail unfurled into the wind. The sudden propulsion caught the ghostly captain mid-motion, sending the Pearl hurtling forward and wrenching the spectral figure off balance. The chest, surrounded by flames, pulsed violently. The ghost captain snarled, vanishing in a swirl of mist as he lunged toward it. But the Pearl's sudden surge had already pulled it out of the reach of the spectral galleon, which began to flicker and fade like a shadow losing its tether to light. Mid the shouts of victory, Rafe's voice cut through, low and slick. "Well played, Captain," but there was no joy in his eyes, only a glint of something darker. Before Jack could turn, Rafe drew a dagger, lunging with the precision of a man who had done this before. A flash of metal and the gleam of Marisol's blade intercepted him, clashing with a screech that rang across the deck. Rafe staggered back, eyes narrowing at Marisol. "Traitor!" he spat, his voice tight with rage. Jack moved faster than a cat in a squall, grabbing the hilt of his cutlass and pressing the tip to Rafe's throat. "Not today, mate," he said, voice dangerously calm. "There's only room for one betrayal at a time, and I choose when." Rafe's eyes darted between Jack and the edge of the ship. With a sudden twist, he knocked the blade aside and leaped over the rail into the churning waters below, disappearing into the spray and shadows. For a moment, there was silence as the storm began to howl around them. Marisol's breath came heavy. "He'll come back, you know." Jack nodded, eyes fixed on the roiling sea where Rafe had vanished. "Aye, but not before we find out just what price this compass holds." The crew, shaken but alive, began to regroup as the wind screamed louder. In the center of the deck, the chest lay half open, fire flickering around it as the phantom compass shimmered, its needle spinning wildly, pointing towards something far beyond the horizon. The ghostly fleet was gone, but the battle had only just begun. With the compass in hand and betrayal thwarted, at least for now, the Black Pearl pressed forward into the storm, toward the answers that could shatter them all. The storm unleashed its fury as if summoned by the compass itself. Waves towered around the Black Pearl, their crests curling like the hands of an angry god ready to drag them into the abyss. Rain lashed at the crew, stinging their faces and drenching the deck until it gleamed with the ghostly light of the churning sea. Jack stood at the helm, eyes narrowed against the sting of salt and spray, his hand gripping the phantom compass, now safely tethered to his belt. The compass was an enigma, pulsing with a faint light as its needle spun in manic circles. Whatever it pointed to, it was powerful enough to summon storms and stir the dead. Marisol, her dark hair plastered to her face, shouted above the wind, "Captain, we need to find safe waters or we'll be splinters before dawn." Jack nodded, his usual smile replaced by a line of focused determination. He turned to his crew, soaked and exhausted, but driven by the same thrill that pushed him. "You heard her. Reef the sails and brace yourselves." He glanced at the compass again, its glow intensifying. Whatever lay ahead, they were on a path they could not abandon. Below deck, the crew worked with desperate hands to tie down loose barrels and keep the water from claiming their only refuge. Lanterns swayed, casting jittery shadows that seemed to mock their fear. Amid the chaos, a voice, low and cold, whispered through the cracks in the wooden beams. "The compass will take more than it gives." The sound slithered into Rafe's ears as he pulled himself up from the hold, dripping with seawater and seething with betrayal. He'd clung to the Pearl's hull like a barnacle, waiting for his moment. Eyes dark with rage, he stalked through the shifting shadows of the lower deck, a dagger glinting in his hand. Above, Jack's keen eyes caught the flicker of lightning that illuminated the sea ahead. Through the storm's fury, he saw it, a jagged shape rising from the water, an island wreathed in storm clouds that churned as if alive. The Isle of Sable Vortex. The compass needle spun once more and locked firmly in its direction, as if the artifact itself had been waiting for this moment. "There!" Jack shouted, pointing. "Sail into the eye of the storm!" Marisol's eyes widened. "You've lost your mind." "Trust me," Jack replied, his grin returning with a reckless gleam. "It's only the beginning." The Pearl surged forward, defying the waves that threatened to split her hull. The crew clung to the ropes, every muscle straining as the wind shrieked like a banshee around them. The moment they crossed into the calm center of the vortex, the howling wind cut off like a blade through cloth. Silence crashed over them, eerie and unnatural. The crew exchanged uneasy glances as if waiting for the sea to catch its breath and attack once more. Then came a sound, soft and rhythmic, echoing from the island ahead, the steady thump of a drum. Marisol's face paled. "That's not a welcome," she muttered. Jack raised the compass, its glow illuminating the dark, storm-shadowed cliffs of the island. Shadows flickered between the trees, forms that moved with a purpose that chilled the blood. "Prepare for landing," he ordered, ignoring the way his heart thudded as if in answer to those drums. The Pearl slid onto a rocky beach, her hull scraping against stone with a shudder that left the crew clutching the rails. No sooner had they secured the ship than Rafe appeared, eyes wild and dagger raised. "Your voyage ends here, Jack," he spat, rushing forward. The crew shouted, some drawing blades, others frozen in shock. Marisol lunged, but Jack waved her off. "This one's mine." He sidestepped Rafe's charge, the deck beneath their feet shifting dangerously as they circled each other. Jack's hand flicked to his belt, freeing the compass. It glowed as if fueled by their fury, casting long, warped shadows across the deck. Rafe's eyes narrowed on the artifact. "That compass will be your doom. You don't even know what you hold." Jack's smile turned sharp, daring. "Maybe not, but I know you won't get it." With a sudden burst of speed, Jack ducked low and kicked Rafe's legs from under him. The dagger clattered across the deck, skidding dangerously close to the edge. Rafe, stunned, scrambled for it, but Marisol was faster, placing her boot on the blade and leveling a glare that could split timber. "It's over," she said, voice edged with finality. Rafe's eyes darted around, calculating, before a resigned smirk crossed his face. "You've won today, Captain. But mark my words, there are worse curses than mine." Before Marisol could react, Rafe shoved himself back, rolling off the edge and plunging into the roiling waves below. The sea swallowed him, leaving nothing but the hiss of foam and the rhythmic drumbeat from the island. Jack exhaled, the tension in his muscles finally loosening. He turned to Marisol and the rest of the crew, who watched with wary eyes. "Let's see what secret this isle holds, and what fate the compass spins for us next." They disembarked, boots sinking into the wet, gritty sand as the haunting drumbeat echoed louder, guiding them toward the jungle's dark, gaping mouth. The Isle of Sable Vortex was awake, and they were not alone. The jungle loomed before them, dense and dripping with an unnatural humidity that clung to the skin like a second layer. Each leaf and branch seemed alive, twisting as if to watch the intruders stepping onto their soil. The rhythmic drumbeat grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their boots and into their bones. Captain Jack led the way, the phantom compass glowing with an eerie light that flickered and pulsed with each thump. "Stay sharp," he murmured, eyes darting to every shifting shadow. His voice was low, but it carried enough weight to bring a hush over the nervous crew trailing behind him. Marisol walked a pace behind, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger, eyes scanning the tree line for any movement. The jungle was alive with sound, chirps, rustles, the occasional distant shriek, but the drumbeat overpowered them all, a heartbeat that drove them deeper into the island's embrace. They ventured farther, the vegetation thickening until they found themselves surrounded by towering trees, whose trunks twisted skyward like gnarled sentinels. Suddenly, the ground beneath Jack's boot gave way with a sickening crunch, and he dropped into a hidden pit. The crew shouted in alarm, the world spinning around him until he landed hard on a moss-covered stone floor. Marisol's face appeared at the edge of the pit, eyes wide with concern. "Jack, are you alive, if that's what you're asking?" Jack groaned, sitting up and dusting off dirt and leaves. He glanced around, noting the walls carved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift when touched by the light of the compass. A low hum filled the air, as if the stones themselves were speaking in a forgotten tongue. The rest of the crew scrambled to find ropes and haul their captain back up, but before they could, a voice echoed through the pit, deep and disembodied. "The Seeker has come." Jack's heart pounded and he reached instinctively for his cutlass. "If that's you, Rafe, now's not the time for riddles." But the voice did not belong to Rafe. From the dark corners of the pit, ghostly shapes coalesced, forming figures in ragged cloaks, their eyes burning with the same baleful green light that marked the fleet of the Forsaken. They moved forward, skeletal hands pointing at the compass in Jack's grasp. "You awaken the path that binds the living to the lost," one specter whispered, its voice rustling like dry leaves. "To hold the compass is to court a fate worse than death." A shiver raced down Jack's spine, but he met their gaze with defiance. "I've flirted with worse, friend," he said, lifting the compass higher. The ghostly figures recoiled slightly, as if repelled by its light. Behind him, Marisol dropped into the pit with a thud, her blade at the ready. "Is there ever a time when you're not in trouble?" she muttered. Jack smirked. Wouldn't be much of an adventure otherwise. The other crew members peered cautiously into the pit, their faces pale as they took in the glowing apparitions. "Captain, the drumbeat, it's getting closer," one of them stammered. The specters faded, their forms unraveling like mist in a wind, but their warning lingered. Above, the trees parted as if pushed by invisible hands, revealing a pathway that led deeper into the island's heart. The drumbeat changed, faster now, accompanied by the faint sound of voices chanting in an ancient language that made the hair on the back of Jack's neck stand on end. They climbed out of the pit, eyes fixed on the dark path before them. The jungle grew thicker, pressing in around them like a living thing, and the air reeked of damp earth and something metallic. The compass tugged at Jack's grip, its needle spinning and then locking in place, pointing directly ahead. "Whatever lies at the end of this road, it's calling us," Marisol said, her voice tight. She glanced at Jack, who nodded with a solemn smile. "Then let's answer." They followed the path, pushing through the underbrush until the jungle fell away to reveal a clearing. At its center stood a massive stone altar, carved with symbols that pulsed in time with the drumbeat. Around it, hooded figures in black robes chanted, their hands raised as if summoning the power of the storm that roared above. The leader of the robed figures turned, revealing a gaunt face with eyes that glowed the same sickly green as the specters. He raised one bony hand, and the chanting ceased. "You come for the compass's promise, but this place was never meant for the living," he said, his voice echoing like thunder. Jack stepped forward, every muscle coiled and ready. "Sorry, mate, but I've got a knack for going where I'm not wanted." The robed man's lips curled into a smile that sent a chill down Jack's spine. With a flick of his wrist, the air around the altar crackled, and shadows began to rise from the ground, forming into ghostly soldiers with blades as sharp as moonlight. Marisol raised her dagger, eyes narrowing. "Looks like we found the welcoming committee." Jack's grin returned, fierce and full of fire. "Crew of the Black Pearl," he called out, his voice carrying over the wind and drums. "Let's show them how the living fight." With a roar, the battle began. The crew clashed with the ghostly soldiers, steel and flame against the spectral force. The clearing erupted into chaos, shadows dancing under flashes of lightning, as the jungle seemed to close in tighter, trapping them in this deadly game. And at the center of it all, the compass pulsed, its light brighter than ever, as if feeding on the battle itself. The clearing transformed into a maelstrom of steel, shadow, and flame. The ghostly soldiers moved with unnatural grace, their translucent blades slicing through the air with deadly precision. The crew of the Black Pearl fought fiercely, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and determination. Torches sputtered as the rain finally broke through the canopy, hissing when it hit the spectral warriors. But the water did nothing to weaken their resolve. Jack parried the thrust of one ghostly blade with a quick flick of his cutlass, the force of the strike sending a shiver up his arm. The apparition before him, eyes aglow with the eerie green light, dissolved into a fine mist as Marisol appeared behind it, torch in hand and face set in a mask of concentration. "Keep pushing forward," she shouted, sweat and rain mingling on her brow. The crew rallied around her, their voices ragged as they pressed toward the altar where the hooded figures chanted, their words more urgent now, as if the battle was part of some larger ritual. Jack's eyes locked on the gaunt leader, who stood unmoved by the chaos around him. The phantom compass pulsed at Jack's side, the needle quivering and pulling as if alive. He had a split-second decision to make: use the compass to unravel whatever dark power kept these warriors standing, or go straight for the heart, the robed leader who orchestrated this nightmare. A yell tore through the cacophony. One of the crew, a young lad named Thomas with a freckled face that had seen more fear in the past hour than in a lifetime, fell back with a scream as a ghostly blade passed through him. His body convulsed as frost spread across his skin, but the ghostly warrior dissolved before it could finish its strike, leaving him shivering but alive. Jack's jaw clenched, rage bubbling beneath his skin. "Marisol, cover me!" he barked, and without waiting for a reply, he surged forward, cutting through the melee with determined strides. Marisol's eyes flicked to Jack and then to the hooded figures. She nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. With a whistle that cut through the rain and roar, she signaled the crew to form a protective line, torches raised and blades ready. Jack reached the stone altar, the carved symbols glowing bright enough to sting his eyes. The leader's gaze snapped to Jack, a cold smile creeping across his face. "You think the compass grants power, but it is a prison," he said, lifting his arms as shadows coalesced behind him, forming a swirling wall that threatened to close Jack off from his crew. "Funny, I never did trust a cage," Jack retorted, leaping onto the altar with the agility of a man who had cheated the gallows more times than he could count. The compass glowed in his hand, the needle spinning before locking with a decisive click, pointing straight at the hooded figure. The leader's eyes widened, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of fear. "You know not what you wield," he roared, lunging forward as his form began to flicker and distort, merging with the shadows behind him. Jack's grin was feral. "I learned fast." He twisted the compass, the glow surging into a blinding flash. The storm above seemed to hesitate, a heartbeat of silence before a bolt of lightning split the sky, striking the altar and sending a shockwave through the clearing. The robed figures screamed as one, their chants breaking into gasps as they were flung back by the force. The ghostly soldiers wavered, their forms flickering like dying embers, before collapsing into heaps of smoke that dissipated into the rain. The leader clutched at his chest, the green glow in his eyes dimming as he looked up at Jack with a snarl of fury. "You unleash a fate sealed by the ancients," he whispered, his voice dissolving into the wind. With one final shudder, the hooded man crumbled into shadows, leaving behind nothing but a chill that seeped into Jack's bones. The rain hammered down, soaking the clearing as if trying to cleanse the remnants of the battle. The silence was shattered by a cheer. The crew, battered and weary, rallied around the altar, their torches still sputtering defiantly against the storm. Marisol, breathing heavily, met Jack's eyes. "Is it over?" she asked, the question edged with hope and disbelief. Jack glanced at the compass, now dim in his hand, the needle still locked in place. The jungle seemed to draw a long, deep breath, the drumbeat gone, replaced by the soft, steady hiss of the rain. But he knew better than to believe in simple victories. "For now," he said, though a gnawing dread twisted in his chest. The compass's final pulse had left him with a feeling that the story wasn't done. It had merely turned a page. A sudden movement caught his eye. At the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged, clothes torn and eyes dark. Rafe stood, dripping with rain and staring back at Jack with a look that promised more than vengeance. There was knowledge there, a dangerous glint that spoke of secrets yet unveiled. Marisol tensed beside Jack, following his gaze. He survived. Jack nodded slowly. And he's not alone. The storm ebbed, but the unease did not. They had the compass, but at what price? The crew shifted restlessly, whispers of the battle and the spectral warnings on their lips. Jack's smile returned, but it was tempered, wary. "Back to the Pearl, mates. We sail before the island changes its mind." The jungle watched them retreat, its shadows long and silent. The Isle of Sable Vortex had given up its prize, but something far more ancient had awakened, and it was bound to follow them to the ends of the sea. The Black Pearl cut through the choppy waters as the storm finally broke, leaving the crew drenched and shaken, but alive. The Isle of Sable Vortex receded into the distance, its silhouette a dark whisper against the clearing sky. Captain Jack stood at the helm, the phantom compass secured in his grip. The once blazing artifact was now cool to the touch, its needle unmoving, but Jack knew the stillness was a lie. Marisol approached, eyes locked on the compass as if it might suddenly burst into flames. "You don't look pleased for a man who just took a cursed island's greatest secret," she said, voice low and tinged with exhaustion. Jack's lips twisted into a wry smile. "That's because the greatest secrets have a nasty habit of biting back." He glanced toward the horizon, where the storm clouds still brooded, reluctant to let the pearl slip from their grasp. "And I've a feeling this one has teeth." A shout rang from the crow's nest, shattering the uneasy calm. "Sail on the starboard! It's him!" Every eye snapped to the horizon. There, cutting through the dawn mist like a dagger, was a ship draped in sails blacker than midnight. Rafe had returned, and this time he commanded a ship that no man could mistake. The Widow's Whale, a vessel said to be as merciless as its captain. Jack's jaw tightened. Rafe's survival was no mere stroke of luck. It was calculated, inevitable. The man was as cunning as the sea was deep, and whatever power he'd discovered on the isle, he was bringing it with him. "Battle stations!" Marisol shouted, the crew jolting into action as the Pearl came alive with the sound of feet pounding against the deck and cannons creaking as they were primed. The air grew thick with tension, every man and woman bracing for the clash that would either cement their legend or mark their graves. Rafe's ship closed the distance, sleek and deadly. The Widow's Whale seemed almost spectral itself, gliding over the waves with a speed that defied nature. The first cannon blast erupted from her deck, a shot that missed the Pearl by mere feet, but sent a spray of seawater over the crew, who flinched as if struck. Jack spun the helm, eyes sharp. "Let's see if she still fears the old girl's bite," he muttered. The Pearl turned, cannons lined up and ready. The sea rumbled as the two ships exchanged fire. Cannonballs split the sky with howls that echoed across the water. The Pearl shuddered as one shot slammed into her starboard side, splintering wood and sending crew members scrambling. The acrid scent of gunpowder mingled with the salt spray, stinging the eyes and clogging the throat. Marisol, balanced at the edge of the deck with one foot braced and sword drawn, shouted over the din, "They're boarding, Captain." Even before the last word left her lips, grappling hooks soared through the air, thudding into the Pearl's timbers. Rafe's crew leaped aboard, faces painted with dark streaks that made them look more ghost than man. They attacked with the ferocity of those who had already counted themselves among the dead. Jack met the first wave with a flourish of his cutlass, parrying and striking in a dance as old as the sea. A brute of a man lunged at him, face twisted with rage. Jack sidestepped, driving his blade into the man's ribs with a swift twist before ducking under a swinging axe. The battle surged around him, a storm of shouts, clashing steel and splintered wood. Rafe appeared amidst the chaos, his dark eyes fixed on Jack with a chilling calm. He moved with an ease that spoke of years spent honing his skill, blade catching the morning light. "Did you really think I'd fall to the waves?" he called, voice rich with scorn. Jack smiled, teeth flashing. "I had hoped," he quipped, stepping forward. Their blades met with a metallic clang that sent shivers down the spine. Rafe's strength was relentless, each blow a reminder of the man's unforgiving ambition. Marisol fought her way toward them, eyes darting between Jack and Rafe, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. "Jack, the compass!" she yelled, nodding toward the artifact at his belt. Rafe's eyes followed, narrowing. His smirk widened. "You hold the key, but I know the door." He lunged, their blades clashing again as the ship rocked beneath them, the fight teetering on the edge of chaos. Suddenly, a wave of shadow rolled across the deck, snuffing out the sunlight and silencing the battle in a heartbeat. The ghostly figures from the aisle appeared, surrounding Rafe, their eyes still burning with that baleful light. One, taller than the rest and cloaked in spectral rags, raised an arm toward the compass. "Release it," the figure commanded, voice echoing like the sea in a storm. Rafe's expression faltered for a split second, the weight of his ambition clashing with fear. "This power is mine," he shouted, slicing at the nearest ghost. His blade passed through it harmlessly, and the specter reached forward, gripping his wrist. Frost crept up his arm, eyes widening in shock as his breath clouded in the chill. Jack saw the opening, heart pounding. "Marisol, now!" he shouted, tossing the compass to her. She caught it, eyes wide as it pulsed, the light within flaring once more. The ghostly figures turned their gaze to her, frozen in a moment that seemed to hold the breath of the entire sea. "Return the compass and you may yet leave with your souls," the spectral leader intoned. Marisol looked to Jack, then at Rafe, who struggled against the icy hold, his face twisting with defiance and pain. The ship creaked under the weight of the choice, time itself seeming to hang on her next move. Jack's eyes, for once, were solemn. "Marisol," he said softly, the battle around them forgotten. She hesitated, then nodded, and with a firm breath she stepped forward and placed the compass on the deck. The wind died, the sea stilled, and the ghosts withdrew, their forms wavering as they reached for the compass. Rafe gasped, stumbling back as the frost released him. His eyes locked on Jack's, fury mixed with something darker. "You haven't won," he hissed, backing away as his crew, broken and scattered, retreated to the Widow's Wail. The spectral figures vanished, leaving only the compass glowing faintly before dimming entirely. The silence roared louder than the battle had, until a cheer rose from the crew of the Pearl, their relief palpable. Marisol sagged against the rail, eyes on Jack. "Was that it?" she whispered, barely daring to hope. Jack's smile returned, haunted but defiant. "Not by a long shot, but it'll do for now." And as the Widow's Wail slipped back into the mist, taking Rafe and his unfulfilled ambition with it, the Black Pearl turned into the dawn, compass in hand, and eyes set on whatever cursed fate awaited them next. The sun rose higher, casting golden light across the rolling sea as the Black Pearl sliced through the calm waters. The battle's echoes lingered in the air, a memory that clung to every creak of the ship and every shiver in the hearts of the crew. They worked in a subdued silence, their eyes darting to the horizon, half expecting the Widow's Wail to return with vengeance. But the sea was clear, its only company the cries of gulls and the gentle lapping of waves. Jack stood at the bow, the phantom compass cradled in his hands, its pulse now quiet, almost dormant. Marisol approached, her step measured as she wiped sweat and seawater from her brow. "So, where does it lead now?" she asked, eyes sharp but weary. Jack's grin flickered back, a shadow of its usual swagger. "Wherever fate needs a good kick, I reckon." He glanced at her, the mischief dimmed by the battles etched on their faces. "But it doesn't point to peace, that much I can promise." Behind them, the crew settled into their post-battle rituals, checking rigging, repairing torn sails, and murmuring prayers to old gods that might still be listening. Dumas, the young lad who had faced the touch of the ghostly blade, sat against a barrel, eyes wide and lost. One of the older sailors clapped him on the back, a rough gesture meant to jar him back to the present. Rafe's absence was felt like the chill left by the ghosts themselves. The man had retreated with a fury that burned hot and dangerous. Jack knew he hadn't seen the last of his former mate. Rafe was patient, and now he bore scars that wouldn't heal with time. A reckoning was bound to come, and the compass would be at the heart of it. The midday sun gleamed off the sea, a stark contrast to the memories that clung to the ship like seaweed. A sudden shout from the crow's nest snapped them from their shared reverie. "Land ho! A port ahead!" The Black Pearl's crew erupted with relief. Port Royal's familiar spires rose on the horizon, promising a brief respite from storms and spirits alike. The Pearl glided into the harbor with an elegance that belied its haunted journey. The docks bustled with life, traders shouting prices, sailors swapping tales, and the scent of salt and fish hanging thick in the air. The crew descended the gangplank, boots thudding against the wood, their tension momentarily lifting as they melted into the crowd. Jack held back, eyes scanning the faces, watching for any sign of treachery or danger. Marisol stood at his side, fingers still resting on the hilt of her dagger. "You think Rafe will make a move here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "If he's smart, he won't. But we don't always get the smart villains, do we?" His eyes gleamed as he caught sight of a familiar figure stepping out from the shadows of a dockside tavern. A man cloaked in weathered blue, with a tricorn hat pulled low over his eyes, strode toward them. His skin was sun-darkened and scarred, the face of someone who had seen and caused enough trouble to be known by name alone. Captain Jericho Reed, once a rival, now an ally of convenience, nodded at Jack with the ghost of a grin. "Jack," Reed drawled, his voice as rough as the sea. "Word travels fast. They say you've got a piece of the old world in your hands." Jack's expression tightened, the compass suddenly feeling heavier at his side. "If the old world means ghosts that don't take no for an answer, then I..." He watched as Reed's eyes flickered with something sharp and calculating. "You'll want to guard it well," Reed said, crossing his arms. "There's a storm brewing, one that'll make the fleet of the Forsaken look like a drizzle." The warning hung between them like a blade, shimmering with the promise of danger. Marisol's fingers tensed on her dagger, the weariness in her gaze replaced by a familiar burning resolve. "Then let them come," she muttered. "The Black Pearl stands ready." Jack's grin returned, full of bravado and a touch of madness. "Aye, and if they think we'll be caught unaware, they've never met a pirate worth his salt." He turned to face the Pearl, her dark sails swaying gently as if in agreement. The crew had started to regroup, fresh supplies loading, laughter mingling with shouts as they prepared for the next leg of their endless adventure. The compass at Jack's side hummed with an energy that felt almost eager, as if anticipating the next trial. He glanced down at it, the needle pointing somewhere far beyond the horizon, beyond known maps and whispered legends. The sun dipped lower, casting the docks in a warm, amber glow that belied the tension coiled beneath the surface. Captain Jack tipped his hat to Reed, who returned it with a nod. "Let's hope you're wrong about that storm," Jack said, though the spark in his eyes told another story. With the Black Pearl's shadow stretching long over the bustling port, Jack turned to Marisol. "Ready to see just how deep this curse runs?" he asked, voice low and filled with a mix of dread and excitement. Marisol's lips twitched into a smile, the kind shared by those who had faced the abyss and come back, changed, but alive. Always. As the crew resumed their places and the Pearl unfurled her sails once more, the horizon beckoned with a promise. Dark waters lay ahead, whispering of hidden treasures and curses older than the stars. And in the heart of the ship, where the compass pulsed like a heartbeat, the next chapter of their tale awaited, ready to drag them into the unknown once more. The sea held her breath, the Black Pearl pushed forward, and Captain Jack, with a grin as wide as a storm, led his crew into the deep, where no map could guide them, and no man could claim to have mastered the tide. Let's see what the fates have in store. If you enjoyed this thrilling tale of high seas adventure, supernatural battles, and betrayal on the Black Pearl, be sure to subscribe to You Pirate for more epic stories and legendary voyages. Don't miss out on the next chapter of danger and discovery. Hit that subscribe button, share with your fellow adventurers, and prepare to set sail on your next great adventure. Join the crew today and keep the spirit of the sea alive.